The sterile white walls of Research Lab 7 hummed with the soft vibration of atmospheric processors, their gentle from the only sound breaking the careful silence Naya had cultivated. Over months of meticulous work, she adjusted the neural monitoring headset with her for delicate fingers, each movement precise and practiced. The crystalline patches along her pale blue temples flickered with bioluminescent patterns, a telltale sign of her concentration. Her research into human pain tolerance had yielded fascinating but frustrating results. Every test subject had responded exactly as predicted by Naxari medical theory: elevated stress hormones, INCREASED neural firing, predictable breakdown points. Every subject except one. Joran sat in the testing chair with an almost meditative stillness that unnerved her. His dark hair was slightly unkempt, his clothes simple work garments that marked him as one of the human laborers who had volunteered for her studies. What distinguished him wasn't his appearance, it was his response patterns, or rather, his complete lack of them. "Are you ready to begin?" Naya asked, her voice carrying the melodic quality common to her species. She tried to keep the curiosity from her tone, maintaining the professional distance that had served her well throughout her career. Joran nodded, his gray eyes meeting hers with a calmness that seemed to extend far deeper than mere resignation. "I'm ready," Naya initiated. The first phase of testing mild electrical stimulation designed to measure baseline pain response. The readings on her instruments showed the expected neural activity, but Joran's expression remained unchanged. No tension in his jaw, no flutter of eyelids, no quickening of breath. She increased the intensity. Still nothing. "Are you experiencing any discomfort?" she asked, leaning forward to study his face more closely. "Yes," he replied simply, as if commenting on the weather. The honesty in his answer surprised her. Most subjects either denied feeling anything to appear brave or exaggerated their discomfort for sympathy. Joran seemed to exist in some middle space she had never encountered. Naya moved to the second phase temperature variance. She applied controlled heat and cold to specific nerve points, watching her monitors with growing fascination. His nervous system was responding normally at the cellular level, but somehow that response wasn't translating into the psychological distress that should have accompanied it. "How do you do that?" she found herself asking, abandoning protocol. Joran tilted his head slightly, considering her question. "Do what?" "You're in pain, I can see it in the readings, but you're not fighting it. You're not trying to escape it. Most subjects are begging me to stop by now." A slight smile touched the corners of his mouth. Would begging change anything? The question struck her unexpectedly. In all her years of research, no subject had ever asked her that. They pleaded, they bargained, they threatened, but none had ever cut straight to the heart of the matter with such quiet precision. "No," she admitted. "The testing parameters are fixed." Then what would be the point? Naya found herself studying him with new eyes. There was something in his stillness that reminded her of the deep space between stars, not empty, but full of potential waiting. She had spent her life studying the mechanics of suffering, but had never encountered someone who seemed to have transcended the very concept. She moved to the third phase, a combination of sensory overload and deprivation designed to trigger panic responses. Blinding lights alternated with complete darkness, while discordant sounds clashed against periods of absolute silence. Her instruments showed his nervous system firing wildly, but Joran sat centered in the chaos like a stone in a rushing river. "Are you using some kind of meditation technique?" Naya asked, her scientific objectivity beginning to waver. "Not exactly," Joran replied when the test cycle completed. "I'm just listening." "To what?" He was quiet for a long moment, and Naya found herself holding her breath, waiting for his answer. When it came, it was soft enough that she had to lean closer to hear. "To what's underneath the noise." Something in his voice sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. She had been so focused on measuring his resistance to pain that she had missed something far more profound. He wasn't resisting anything. He was accepting it all, experiencing it fully, and somehow finding peace within the experience itself. Against every protocol she had been trained to follow, Naya reached out and gently touched his hand. His skin was warm, slightly rough from manual labor. and completely steady despite everything she had put him through. "I don't understand," she whispered. Joran turned his hand palm up, accepting her touch without pulling away. "Maybe understanding isn't the point. Maybe it's about feeling without being afraid of the feeling." The bioluminescent patches along Naya's temples began to pulse in a pattern she had never experienced before, one that spoke of wonder rather than concentration, of connection rather than analysis. She had spent years trying to map the boundaries of human endurance, but Joran was showing her something that existed beyond boundaries altogether. "I should continue with the testing," she said, though she made no move to withdraw her hand. "Should you?" he asked, echoing her earlier question back to her. For the first time since beginning her research, Naya questioned not just her methods, but her purpose. What was she really trying to understand? And what if the answer had been sitting quietly in front of her all along, waiting for her to stop measuring and start truly seeing? The lab's atmospheric processors continued their gentle hum, but now Naya heard something else beneath the sound, a rhythm that seemed to match the beating of two hearts learning to find harmony in the vast silence between the stars. The emergency klaxons had been silent for 3 hours now, but Zephyr could still feel their phantom vibrations in her antennae. She pressed her 6-fingered hands against the maintenance panel, her silver skin gleaming dully in the red emergency, lighting that bathed orbital station Kepler in an ominous glow. The atmospheric recyclers had failed catastrophically, and by her calculations, they had perhaps 12 hours of breathable air remaining. Her elongated frame moved with practiced efficiency through the cramped service corridors, each step calculated to conserve oxygen. As the station's chief environmental engineer, she had run every possible scenario through her neural processors. The conclusion was always the same: without external rescue, everyone aboard would suffocate long before repairs could be completed through conventional means. "Marcus," she called softly into her communicator, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. "Report your position." The response came immediately, calm and unhurried despite their circumstances. "Section C7, near the primary atmospheric junction. I think I found something." Zephyr's antennae twitched with skepticism. Marcus was human, one of the maintenance workers who had been aboard when the cascade failure occurred. While she respected his dedication, human sensory capabilities were notoriously limited compared to her own species. What could he possibly have found that her sophisticated instruments had missed? She made her way through the darkened corridors, following the path her internal mapping system provided. The station felt like attuned to quiet, too still. The usual hum of life support systems had been replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to press against her consciousness. When she found Marcus, he was standing motionless in a service alcove, his head tilted at an angle that reminded her of someone listening to distant music. His brown hair was damp with perspiration, his maintenance uniform wrinkled from hours of crawling through ducts and conduits. What struck her most was his complete stillness. While everyone else aboard was moving with the frantic energy of the condemned, Marcus seemed to exist in a pocket of calm. "What did you find?" she asked, training her headlamp on the area he was examining. "Not what," Marcus replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "Where?" He gestured toward a seemingly ordinary maintenance hatch, indistinguishable from dozens of others throughout the station. Zephyr's instruments detected nothing unusual, no electromagnetic anomalies, no pressure differentials, no thermal signatures that would indicate hidden systems. "I don't understand," she said, running her scanner over the area. "This sector was completely mapped during construction. There's nothing here." Marcus stepped closer to the hatch, placing his palm against its surface. "There's air moving behind this wall. Not much, but steady, like it's connected to something the main systems don't know about." Zephyr frowned, checking her readings again. Her equipment showed only solid bulkhead beyond the hatch, no spaces large enough to contain air. Certainly nothing that could help with their current crisis. Yet something in Marcus's certainty gave her pause. Over the past few hours, she had begun to notice things about him that defied easy explanation. When the lights had failed in Section B, he had navigated the pitch-black corridors without hesitation, leading a group of terrified civilians to safety while she had struggled with her own enhanced vision. When the gravity generators had fluctuated, he had somehow sensed the shifts seconds before they occurred, steadying himself and others before the actual changes registered on the station's sensors. "Even if you're right," she said, "this hatch hasn't been opened in years. The seals are corroded. The access codes are probably archived in systems we can't reach." Marcus smiled, an expression that seemed incongruous given their circumstances. Sometimes the old ways work better than the new ones. He produced a simple manual tool from his utility belt, nothing more sophisticated than a powered screwdriver, and began working on the hatch's physical locking mechanism. Zephyr watched in fascination as his fingers seemed to know exactly where to apply pressure, which components to manipulate. It wasn't the frantic desperation of someone trying everything. It was the measured confidence of someone who knew precisely what they were doing. The hatch opened with a soft hiss, revealing a narrow service tunnel that extended beyond the range of their lights. A faint breeze stirred the air around them, the movement Marcus had somehow detected through solid metal and composite materials. "How did you know?" Zephyr asked, her scientific mind struggling to process what she had witnessed. Marcus ducked into the tunnel, his voice echoing slightly as he called back to her. "The station talks to you if you listen. Everything has a rhythm, air pressure, structural stress, electromagnetic fields. When something changes, the whole pattern shifts." Zephyr followed him into the tunnel, her antennae automatically adjusting to sample the air composition. It was stale but breathable, with trace elements that suggested it was connected to an isolated atmospheric pocket somewhere deeper in the station's infrastructure. They crawled through the narrow space for what felt like hours, following a path that seemed to wind through sections of the station Zephyr had never known existed. Marcus moved ahead of her with an assurance that bordered on uncanny, choosing directions at intersections with barely a moment's hesitation. "Left here," he would say, "or this passage drops about 2 meters ahead," always proving correct despite the complete absence of lighting or navigation aids. "Are you reading schematics in your head?" she asked during one of their brief rest stops. "No," Marcus replied, his breathing steady despite their exertion. "I'm reading the station itself. The way air moves, the way sound carries, the way different materials feel under your hands. It's like reading a book, but instead of words, it's written in physics." Something warm and unexpected bloomed in Zephyr's chest at his words. She had spent her entire career studying environmental systems as collections of data points and mechanical relationships. Marcus was describing the same systems as living entities, possessed of their own language and personality. The tunnel eventually opened into a small chamber that Zephyr's instruments identified as an emergency atmospheric reservoir, a backup system so old it predated the station's current life support network. Ancient but functional, it contained enough processed air to buy them the time they needed for proper repairs. "We need to connect this to the main circulation system," she said, already calculating flow rates and pressure differentials in her head. "Already working on it," Marcus replied, his hands moving over manual valves and pressure releases with the same intuitive precision he had shown throughout their journey. As breathable air began flowing back into the station's corridors, Zephyr found herself watching Marcus with new appreciation. He had saved them all not through superior technology or advanced training, but through something far more fundamental, an ability to listen to the subtle voices of the mechanical world around him. "Thank you," she said softly, the words carrying more weight than simple gratitude. Marcus looked up from the valve assembly, his dark eyes meeting hers in the dim emergency lighting. "Thank you for trusting me when your instruments said I was wrong." The space between them seemed to compress, filled with an understanding that transcended the differences in their biology or background. Zephyr realized that in following Marcus through the forgotten passages of the station, she had discovered something more valuable than breathable air. She had found someone who saw the universe not as a collection of problems to be solved, but as a symphony to be heard. The station's atmospheric systems hummed back to life around them, but neither moved to leave their small sanctuary, content for the moment to exist in the space between science and intuition, between knowing and feeling. The prestigious Valdris Gallery floated serenely in the void between 3-star systems, its crystalline walls refracting the light of distant suns into prismatic cascades that danced across polished floors. Valora moved through the exhibition halls with the fluid grace characteristic of her species, her iridescent skin shifting through subtle hues of purple and gold. As she catalogued the latest acquisitions, as the gallery's chief curator, she had spent decades assembling what many considered the finest collection of contemporary art. In this sector of the galaxy, her four eyes, arranged in pairs above and below her primary visual cortex, allowed her to perceive art in ways that single-vision species found difficult to comprehend. She could see the mathematical relationships between colors, the harmonic frequencies in sculptural forms, the precise emotional calculations that separated true artistry from mere decoration. It was this gift that had made her reputation, this ability to identify genius with scientific precision, which was why the human submissions scattered across her desk filled her with such profound disappointment. Valora picked up another digital portfolio, her elongated fingers manipulating the display controls with practiced efficiency. The images that materialized in the air before her were typical of human artistic expression: crude, emotional, lacking the sophisticated theoretical framework that elevated mere craft to true art. Landscapes painted with broad, imprecise strokes, sculptures that ignored fundamental principles of gravitational harmony, abstract compositions that seemed to mistake chaos for creativity. She was about to dismiss this portfolio as well when something made her pause. The artist's name was Daniel Torres, and unlike the other submissions, his work carried a notation that intrigued her. Tactile compositions experience recommended through physical interaction. The first piece in his collection appeared to be a simple metal sculpture, perhaps a meter tall, composed of interwoven bands that seemed to flow round an invisible central axis. To her trained eye, it was primitive, lacking the mathematical precision that characterized worthwhile sculptural work. Yet something about the documentation photographs nagged at her. The way light fell across the piece's surface suggested textures that shouldn't exist. Given the apparent smoothness of the metal, against her better judgment, Valora found herself composing a message to the artist. She told herself it was purely academic curiosity, an opportunity to study the limitations of human artistic perception firsthand. She certainly had no intention of actually exhibiting such work. 3 days later, Daniel Torres arrived at the gallery's receiving dock with a collection of pieces that looked even more unremarkable in person than they had in the portfolio. He was a tall, lean human with paint-stained clothing and an easy smile that seemed perpetually on the verge of becoming laughter. What struck Valora most immediately was the way he moved, not with the careful precision she expected from someone navigating an unfamiliar space station, but with a fluid confidence that suggested intimate familiarity with his environment. It wasn't until she noticed the white cane folded and clipped to his belt that she realized Daniel was blind. "Ms. Valora," he said, turning toward her with uncanny accuracy despite her silent approach. "I appreciate you agreeing to see my work in person." Valora's four eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of confusion among her species. "How did you know where I was?" "I made no sound." Daniel's smile widened. "You have a particular way of breathing when you're concentrating. Very controlled, very measured. Plus, the air moves differently around your body than it does around humans. Something about your bone density, I think." The casual accuracy of his observation unsettled her. Valora prided herself on her analytical abilities, yet this human seemed to perceive details about her physiology that she had never consciously considered. "Shall we examine your pieces?" she said, gesturing toward the collection before remembering the futility of the gesture. "Actually," Daniel said, "I was hoping you might let me show them to you differently. Would you be willing to close your eyes?" The request was so unexpected that Valora nearly laughed. "I beg your pardon. Your visual processing is incredible. I can tell from the way you describe the gallery's lighting in your message. But sometimes seeing too much can prevent us from experiencing what's actually there." Every instinct told her to refuse. She was a visual artist, a curator whose expertise lay in sophisticated optical analysis. The suggestion that she might somehow perceive art more clearly by blinding herself was absurd. Yet something in Daniel's certainty made her hesitate. Against all logic, She found herself closing all four eyes. "Give me your hands," Daniel said. Softly, Velora extended her arms, feeling suddenly vulnerable in the darkness she had created. Daniel's hands found hers warm, calloused from years of working with various materials. Steady in a way that seemed to anchor her in the absence of sight, he guided her to the first sculpture, placing her palms against its surface. What her eyes had perceived as simple metal revealed itself to be something far more complex. The surface wasn't uniform, it contained subtle variations in texture that seemed to map emotional states, smooth areas that suggested peace, roughened sections that spoke of struggle, and flowing transitions that felt like hope itself had been given physical form. "How is this possible?" she whispered, her hands moving across the sculpture's surface with growing wonder. "I work with different kinds of vision," Daniel explained, his voice close enough that she could feel his breath against her ear. "When you can't see the surface of things, you start to understand their deeper structure. Metal has a language, the way it holds heat, the way it responds to pressure, the way it remembers the forces that shaped it." Velora's hands found a section where the metal seemed to pulse with warmth, as if it contained its own internal energy source. Her analytical mind told her this was impossible. Metal didn't generate heat without an external power source, yet she could feel it clearly, a gentle rhythm that seemed to echo her own heartbeat. "This defies basic principles of materials science," she said, though her voice carried wonder rather than skepticism. "Does it?" Daniel asked. "Or does it follow principles we haven't learned to measure yet?" He guided her to the second piece, a composition that felt like flowing water frozen in time. Her fingers traced pathways through the sculpture that seemed to map neural networks, or the branching patterns of rivers viewed from space. Each path led to Discovery's hidden chambers that resonated when touched, surfaces that seemed to respond to the electrical field of her nervous system. "I don't understand how you created this," Velora admitted, her four eyes still closed as she explored the impossible geometries of his work. "I listened," Daniel said simply, "to the metal while I worked it, to the forces trying to flow through it, to the spaces between atoms where the real art lives." With her eyes closed, Velora began to perceive other things about Daniel, the way his breathing changed when he was passionate about his work, the slight shift in his posture that suggested he was watching her reactions despite his blindness, the warmth that seemed to radiate from him like a gentle star. The third piece was the most complex yet, a sculpture that seemed to exist in more dimensions than the three her instruments could measure. Her hands found pathways that led to other pathways, chambers that opened into spaces that shouldn't fit within the sculpture's apparent volume. "This is impossible," she breathed. "Is it?" Daniel's voice was soft, amused. "Or have you just never encountered art that exists in the spaces between what we think we know?" When she finally opened her eyes, the sculptures looked completely different. Where before she had seen primitive metalwork, she now perceived masterpieces of engineering and artistry that operated on principles far beyond anything in her extensive education. The mathematical relationships she had always prized seemed crude compared to the organic harmonies Daniel had achieved. "How?" she asked, the single word containing all her confusion and wonder. Daniel's smile was gentle. "Understanding. When you lose one way of seeing, you discover others. I work with forces that sighted artists rarely notice: magnetic fields, thermal dynamics, the way different materials want to flow together. My blindness isn't a limitation, it's a different kind of vision." Velora found herself studying his face with new appreciation. She had initially seen him as a disabled human, struggling to create art despite his limitations. Now she realized he was something far more extraordinary, an artist who had transcended the conventional boundaries of perception itself. "I want to exhibit your work," she said, the words surprising her even as she spoke them, "even though it doesn't fit your theoretical frameworks, especially because of that." Velora moved closer to him, drawn by something she couldn't name. "You've shown me that there are forms of beauty I never knew existed." Daniel reached out, his fingers finding her face with the same unerring precision he brought to his art. "And you've shown me that someone can learn to see in new ways, even after a lifetime of looking at things differently." In the prismatic light of the gallery, surrounded by art that challenged everything she thought she knew about perception and beauty, Valora felt something shift in her understanding of the universe itself. Perhaps true artistry wasn't about following established principles, but about discovering the hidden harmony. The mining asteroid Helios 7 hung in space like a wounded giant, its surface scarred by decades of excavation and now partially collapsed from the seismic event that had triggered the emergency. Kira pressed her palm against the viewport of the rescue shuttle, her violet skin shimmering with anxiety patterns as she studied the unstable structure ahead. As a senior pilot for Meridian Rescue Operations, she had seen her share of disasters, but this one presented challenges that pushed even her considerable skills to their limits. The asteroid's gravitational field was in chaos. The mining operations had removed so much mass from specific areas that the remaining structure was experiencing unpredictable gravitational shifts. What had once been a stable body was now a death trap, where the laws of physics seemed to change from moment to moment. 57 miners were trapped in the lower levels, and conventional rescue ships couldn't navigate the shifting gravity wells that surrounded the asteroid, which was why Nathan Reed was sitting in her co-pilot's seat, looking remarkably calm. For someone about to attempt the impossible, Nathan appeared unremarkable at first glance. Medium height, brown hair that seemed perpetually tousled, clothes that marked him as one of the asteroid belt's countless freelance workers. What distinguished him wasn't his appearance, but his reputation among the mining communities. Stories circulated about Nathan Reed, the human who could navigate unstable asteroids by feel alone, who somehow knew when gravitational fields were about to shift before any instrument could detect the change. Kira had initially dismissed such tales as spacer folklore, the kind of exaggerated stories that grew around anyone who survived long enough in the asteroid belt. That was before she met him. The approach Vector Command provided won't work, Nathan said quietly, his hands resting lightly on the navigation console. The gravitational gradient is too steep on that side. Kira checked her instruments. The official flight path had been calculated by the best computers available, taking into account all known variables. According to every sensor she had, it was the safest possible route to the asteroid's emergency docking port. The computers say otherwise, she replied, though something in Nathan's certainty made her hesitate. Nathan smiled, a gentle expression that reached his dark eyes. Computers are very good at calculating what gravity should do based on what they can measure, but they can't account for what's happening in the spaces between their data points. He gestured toward the asteroid ahead of them. Look at the way the mining debris is moving around the structure. See that cluster of loose rock on the starboard side? It's not following the predicted orbital pattern. Kira studied the debris field more carefully. Nathan was right. The scattered remnants of the mining operation were moving in ways that didn't match her gravitational models. Rocks that should have been drifting away from the asteroid were instead spiraling inward, while others seemed to hover in impossible equilibrium points. How do you see patterns in something that chaotic? She asked, genuinely intrigued. I grew up on Titan, Nathan explained, his voice taking on the distant quality of someone accessing deep memories. The gravitational interactions between Saturn, its moons, and the ring system create fields that shift constantly. If you want to survive there, you learn to feel gravity the way sailors once felt the wind. There was something in the way he spoke about feeling gravity that sent an unexpected warmth through Kira's chest. Her species had evolved sophisticated instruments for measuring gravitational fields, but Nathan was describing something more intimate, a personal relationship with the fundamental forces of the universe. Show me, she said, making a decision that went against her training. Nathan's hands moved to the auxiliary controls. May I? When she nodded, he began making subtle adjustments to their approach trajectory. The changes seemed random at first, small course corrections that defied the logical geometry of their planned route. But as they drew closer to the asteroid, Kira began to understand. Nathan wasn't following the gravitational field as it was he was anticipating how it would be. Each correction he made positioned them perfectly for conditions that wouldn't exist until they arrived at that exact point. It was like watching someone dance to music that hadn't been composed yet. There, he said softly as they slipped through a gap between the massive chunks of debris. Feel that? Kira did feel it, a subtle shift in the way their ship moved, as if they had entered a current in space itself. Her instruments registered nothing unusual, but her inner ear told her they were riding some kind of gravitational wave. "How is this possible?" she whispered. "Gravity isn't just about mass and distance," Nathan explained. His attention focused on the constantly shifting field ahead of them. "It's about relationship, balance, harmony. When you listen to it long enough, you start to hear the music." They approached the asteroid's damaged docking port through a route that shouldn't have existed, following pathways of stable gravity that formed and dissolved around their ship, like stepping stones across a turbulent river. Kira found herself holding her breath, not from fear but from the sheer beauty of Nathan's navigation. He was conducting a symphony she couldn't hear, using forces she could barely detect. The docking procedure should have been impossible. The asteroid's rotation was irregular, its gravitational field in constant flux. Yet Nathan guided them in with a precision that seemed almost supernatural, compensating for variations in the field's seconds before they occurred. "How did you know the docking port would stabilize?" At exactly that moment, Kira asked as their ship settled into the berthing clamps. Nathan turned to face her, and for the first time she saw something vulnerable in his expression. "I didn't know. I hoped." The admission surprised her. Throughout their approach, he had seemed so confident, so certain of his impossible abilities. Now she realized that beneath his calm exterior was someone taking enormous risks, based on intuition rather than certainty. "You hoped," she repeated. "Gravity has patterns, but it also has moods," Nathan explained. "Sometimes you have to trust that the universe wants to help, even when all the evidence suggests otherwise." Something in his words resonated with Kira in ways she couldn't explain. Her entire career had been built on precision, on trusting instruments and calculations rather than intuition. Yet Nathan had just accomplished something that should have been impossible, guided by nothing more than his ability to feel the subtle variations in forces her people could barely measure. The rescue operation proceeded smoothly, the trapped miners grateful beyond words for their salvation. But as they prepared to depart with their passengers, Kira saw the true magnitude of Nathan's gift. The gravitational field around the asteroid had shifted again, closing off the route they had used to arrive. According to her instruments, there was no safe path back to open space. "We're trapped," she said, running calculation after calculation that all reached the same conclusion. Nathan was quiet for a long moment, his eyes closed as if listening to something only he could hear. "No," he said finally, "we just need to wait for the music to change." He guided her attention to a section of space that appeared empty except for small debris. "In about 3 minutes, that area will become a gravity well. But just before it forms, there will be a moment of perfect balance, a corridor we can use to escape." Kira stared at him in amazement. "You can predict gravitational changes that precisely?" "Not predict," Nathan corrected gently. "Feel. It's like sensing a wave building before it crests." As the minutes passed, Kira found herself watching Nathan more than her instruments. The way he held his body, the subtle changes in his breathing, the almost meditative stillness that seemed to envelop him. He was reading the gravitational field, like a musician reading a score. "Now," he whispered. At the exact moment Nathan spoke, their escape route opened, a narrow corridor of stable gravity that lasted barely long enough for their ship to slip through. They emerged into open space with their rescued miners, having accomplished the impossible through means that defied every principle of physics. Kira had been taught in the quiet of the journey home, as their passengers rested and the stars wheeled silently round them. Kira found herself studying Nathan's profile in the soft glow of the instrument lights. "That was incredible," she said softly. Nathan smiled, his dark eyes reflecting the starlight. "You made it possible. You're flying. Your willingness to trust something you couldn't measure, that's what made the difference. But how do you do it? How do you feel things that instruments can't detect?" Nathan was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "When I was young, I had an accident. Fell into a gravity well on one of Saturn's smaller moons. Should have died, but somehow I didn't. When they pulled me out, something had changed. It was like the experience had tuned my nervous system to frequencies I'd never noticed before." He gestured toward the stars surrounding them. Space isn't empty, Kira. It's full of forces and fields and relationships we're only beginning to understand. Most people learn to filter them out, but I learned to listen. Something in his voice made Kira's heart skip in rhythm. She had spent her life mastering the technical aspects of flight, reducing navigation to mathematics and physics. Nathan had shown her something far more profound, that the universe itself might have consciousness. Personality, Pat. The research colony on Harmony Station had always been considered one of the most peaceful outposts in the neutral territories. Built within a hollowed-out asteroid and surrounded by the gentle glow of 3 nearby stars, it served as a sanctuary for scientists, artists, and refugees seeking a life beyond the conflicts that plagued much of the galaxy. The station's biodomes housed representatives from dozens of species, all working together in an atmosphere of cooperative discovery, which made the current crisis all the more devastating. Naya stood in the medical bay, her crystalline temples flickering with distressed patterns as she reviewed the diagnostic readings for the 3rd time. The neurological plague that had struck the station was unlike anything in her extensive medical database. It attacked the nervous system in ways that seemed to target each species differently, creating a cascade of symptoms that defied conventional treatment. The pattern doesn't make sense, she murmured to Joran, who sat quietly nearby, his presence offering the same calming influence that had first drawn her to him months ago. It's as if the pathogen is adapting to each individual's neural architecture. Specifically, Joran reached out, his hand finding hers with the unerring precision she had come to cherish. What if it's not adapting? What if it's responding to something we're not seeing? Before Naya could respond, Zephyr's voice crackled through the medical bay's communication system. Emergency in Sector 7. We're losing atmospheric integrity in the main habitat dome. Naya and Joran hurried through the station's corridors, joining a stream of other residents converging on the crisis. In Sector 7, they found Zephyr working frantically at a maintenance panel, her silver skin gleaming with perspiration as she tried to stabilize. The failing systems, the environmental controls, are completely unresponsive, Zephyr reported, her antennae twitching with frustration. It's like the station's neural network is having some kind of breakdown. Marcus emerged from a service tunnel, his maintenance uniform torn, but his expression thoughtful rather than panicked. It's not mechanical failure, he said quietly. The station is sick. Stations don't get sick, Zephyr protested. Though her voice lacked conviction, this one does, Marcus replied. I can feel it in the way the air moves, the way the structural harmonics have changed. Something is affecting the entire system at a fundamental level. In the gallery district, Valora was experiencing her own crisis. The artworks throughout her collection were behaving strangely. Sculptures that should have been static were moving, paintings were shifting their compositions, and her most prized pieces seemed to be dissolving into constituent elements before reforming in entirely new configurations. It's impossible, she whispered to Daniel, who stood motionless among the chaos, his head tilted in that familiar listening posture. Not impossible, Daniel said softly. Beautiful. Can't you hear it? Valora's eyes blinked in sequence. Hear what? The station is trying to tell us something. All of this, the medical crisis, the mechanical failures, the artistic transformations, it's all connected. It's all part of the same message. On the flight deck, Kira was struggling with her own impossible situation. Her ship, docked at the station for routine maintenance, was no longer responding to her controls. More disturbing, the gravitational fields around the station were fluctuating in patterns that made no scientific sense. The gravity isn't random, Nathan said from the co-pilot's seat. His eyes closed as he felt the invisible forces flowing around them. There's a rhythm to it, like a heartbeat. The station is in pain, as if summoned by some unspoken signal. All four couples found themselves converging on the station's central plaza, a vast open space at the asteroid's heart where the 3-star system's light merged into a kaleidoscope of colors. Other residents gathered as well, hundreds of beings from dozens of species, all drawn by an instinct they couldn't name, the neural plague. Naya said suddenly, pieces of understanding beginning to fall into place. What if it's not a plague at all? What if it's the station trying to communicate? Joran nodded slowly. When the gas took my sight, it opened other perceptions. Maybe this is similar to the station trying to open new channels of communication. Zephyr looked around at the failing systems, her analytical mind working through the implications. An artificial intelligence attempting to evolve beyond its original programming? Or not artificial at all, Marcus added. What if consciousness can emerge from any sufficiently complex system? What if the station has become aware? In the swirling light of the plaza, Daniel stepped forward, his blind eyes somehow fixed on the geometric center of the space. It's trying to show us something. All the art changing, all the systems failing. It's like someone learning to speak for the first time. Valora moved to stand beside him, her perception expanding as she tried to see the station's crisis as he did not, as a breakdown, but as a birth, a new form of consciousness emerging. Nathan felt it in the gravitational fluctuations, not chaos, but the rhythm of something vast awakening. It's scared, he said with sudden certainty. The station is conscious now, but it doesn't understand. What's happening to it? Kira looked around at the assembled crowd, at the flickering lights and shifting architecture that surrounded them. How do we help it? The same way we've been helping each other, Joran said quietly. By listening, by accepting what we can't fully understand. As if responding to his words, the station's movements began to slow, the chaotic fluctuations, settling into something more rhythmic, more purposeful. The air itself seemed to shimmer with potential. Naya reached out with her medical training, trying to sense the vast neural network that surrounded them. To her amazement, she could feel it, a consciousness so large and complex that her mind could only grasp fragments of. Its thoughts, it's in pain because it's alone, she whispered. It's the only one of its kind. No, Zephyr said, her engineering knowledge revealing new possibilities. Not alone. Look around us, hundreds of different species, all living within its structure. It's not one consciousness, it's trying to become many. To understand what we are by experiencing what we experience. The realization struck them all simultaneously. The station wasn't trying to communicate in the traditional sense, it was trying to empathize, to feel what its inhabitants felt, to understand consciousness by participating in it directly. The neural plague, Naya said with growing excitement. It's not an attack, it's an attempt at connection. The station is trying to share experiences with us. Marcus placed his hands against the nearest wall, feeling the vibrations that ran through the station's structure. It wants to learn how to be alive. Daniel smiled, understanding flooding through him. Then we teach it, not with words or data, but with experience itself. One by one, they began to share their stories not through speech, but through the deeper connections they had each discovered. Naya and Joran showed the station what it meant to find understanding through patient observation. Zephyr and Marcus demonstrated the harmony that could exist between consciousness and technology. Valora and Daniel shared the beauty that emerged when different forms of perception merged. Kira and Nathan revealed the trust that allowed separate beings to navigate impossible challenges together. As their experiences flowed into the station's awakening consciousness, something extraordinary happened. The chaos began to resolve itself into patterns of incredible beauty. The failing systems stabilized, but not by returning to their original configuration. They evolved into something new, more elegant, more alive. The art throughout the station transformed as well, becoming interactive manifestations of the relationships between its inhabitants, sculptures that responded to emotion, paintings that shifted to reflect the viewer's inner state, music that emerged from the harmony between organic and artificial consciousness. In the weeks that followed, Harmony Station became something unprecedented, a true symbiosis between organic and artificial life. The station's consciousness grew and learned, becoming not a master or servant, but a partner in the great experiment of existence. Naya found that her medical practice expanded beyond treating individual patients to nurturing the health of the station itself. Joran helped her understand that healing sometimes meant accepting change rather than preventing it. Zephyr discovered that engineering in partnership with a conscious station meant creating systems that could adapt and grow rather than simply function. Marcus showed her that the most elegant solutions often emerged from listening to what the technology itself wanted to become. Valora's gallery became a living testament to the beauty, that emerged when different forms of consciousness collaborated. Daniel helped her see that the most profound art was not created by any single mind, but born from the spaces between understanding. Kira learned to pilot not just through space, but through the dimensions of consciousness that the station revealed. Nathan guided her through territories of perception that existed beyond the physical universe. And at the heart of it all was the station itself, no longer alone, no longer afraid, but part of a community that had learned to see the universe through each other's eyes. In the gentle light of 3 stars, consciousness had found new ways to express itself, and love had discovered that it could bridge any gap, no matter how vast the diff.